Old Hollywood glittered with diamonds, gowns, and dreams, but behind the studio spotlights, some of its brightest stars burned with bitterness. Imagine the elegance of the silver screen masking feuds so venomous they threatened entire productions. What happens when legends clash, not just on camera, but in real life? Today, we uncover 15 shocking rivalries that turned Hollywood into a battlefield of beauty, pride, and betrayal. Number 15. Joan Crawford versus Bette Davis. They were queens of the screen icons who defined the Golden Age. Bette Davis, famed for her sharp wit and powerhouse performances, carried a reputation as one of cinema's most fearless actresses. Joan Crawford, a glamorous, ice-eyed star, symbolized perfection, poise, and the ruthless climb to power. But when these two titans collided, Hollywood braced itself. Their hatred boiled over during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. The Gothic thriller should have been a comeback triumph for both women. Instead, it became a gladiatorial arena. On set, Davis reportedly placed weights in her pockets before a scene where Crawford had to drag her across the floor, making the moment excruciating. Crawford retaliated in her own ways, spreading whispers about Davis's drinking, mocking her appearance, and carefully crafting press leaks to humiliate her rival. The feud wasn't born overnight. Davis resented Crawford's calculated charm, while Crawford despised Davis's refusal to play the Hollywood glamour game. Even off-screen, their hatred raged on. At one awards ceremony, when Davis was nominated for an Oscar, Crawford quietly maneuvered to accept on behalf of another winner just to watch Davis's face fall. What makes their rivalry unforgettable is not just the pettiness, but how it mirrored the very storylines they were cast, in two aging women trapped by fame, clawing desperately at relevance. The film became a cult classic, but its legacy is forever, stained by the venom between its stars. Their feud remains Hollywood's most infamous war of egos, a reminder that brilliance often comes with bloodshed. Number 14. Olivia de Havilland versus Joan Fontaine. They were sisters by blood, rivals by destiny. Olivia de Havilland, the elegant star of Gone with the Wind, seemed every bit the model of grace. Joan Fontaine, her younger sister, carved her own path with a quiet intensity that won her acclaim in Alfred Hitchcock's Suspicion. To the public, they were talented women from the same family tree. Behind the curtains, they were sworn enemies. Their feud began in childhood, but Hollywood magnified it to a myth. In 1942, Fontaine made history by winning the Academy Award for Best Actress. Olivia, nominated the same year, sat stone-faced as Joan collected the golden statue. Fontaine later claimed her sister never forgave her. The bitterness only deepened in 1947, when Olivia finally won her own Oscar. Joan offered her congratulations. Olivia reportedly turned away. Their animosity spilled into tabloids, feeding gossip that delighted audiences. Journalists painted them as a tragic Shakespearean rivalry. Two women cursed to fight over love, fame, and recognition. Their mother allegedly fueled the divide, favoring Olivia and dismissing Joan as weak. As adults, neither forgave the wounds of childhood, and even in interviews decades later, each described the other with icy contempt. Hollywood capitalized on their feud, offering roles that seemed to pit them against one another in public imagination. Yet, while their talents endured, their relationship never healed. At Fontaine's death in 1913, de Havilland released a brief, polite statement, cold, measured, and final. Their story is proof that even shared blood could not thaw the frozen rivalry of Hollywood's golden sisters. Beneath the glamour, their feud became a family tragedy, played out under the world's watchful eye. Number 13. Katharine Hepburn versus Ginger Rogers. Katharine Hepburn was Hollywood royalty, independent, commanding, and fiercely intellectual. Ginger Rogers was adored for her charm, dancing brilliance, and all-American appeal. Both women dominated the screen in the 1930s and 40s, yet behind the spotlight, they embodied two opposing Hollywood ideals. The feud began quietly, not with shouting matches, but with competition for roles. Hepburn despised the studio's favoritism toward Rogers, whom she dismissed as a lightweight entertainer. Rogers, in turn, bristled at Hepburn's air of superiority, her clipped New England accent, and her disdain for the glitzy Hollywood system. Where Hepburn wanted to be taken seriously as an artist, Rogers thrived as a box-office draw. Their conflict hit its peak when RKO Pictures considered Hepburn for roles that ultimately went to Rogers. Hepburn seethed at the idea that Rogers was seen as more bankable. Meanwhile, Rogers allegedly mocked Hepburn's tomboyish persona and lack of glamour. The tension wasn't just professional, it was philosophical. Hepburn believed in individuality, rejecting the studio machine. Rogers played the machine perfectly, cementing herself as Fred Astaire's legendary partner. The rivalry lingered for years, whispered about in Hollywood columns. Though they never shared the same screen, their feud became symbolic of a larger cultural clash in old Hollywood. The intellectual versus the entertainer, the rebel versus the conformist. When Hepburn later won 4 Academy Awards, more than any other actress, critics framed it as her final triumph over rivals like Rogers. But the bitterness lingered in memory. Their feud is remembered as a subtle war, one fought with icy words, sarcastic jabs, and calculated dismissals. It was a battle of ideals that revealed how Hollywood wasn't just about beauty, it was about identity and who controlled the story. Number 12. Marilyn Monroe versus Jane Russell. On the silver screen, Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell lit up Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in 1953. Monroe's innocent bombshell persona perfectly countered Russell's earthy wit, creating one of the most dazzling duos in movie history. But off-screen, the glitter dimmed. Monroe and Russell's relationship became a study in subtle rivalry, jealousy, and unspoken contempt. Russell was already an established star when Monroe was thrust into superstardom. Monroe's lateness on set, her insecurity, and her endless retakes frustrated cast and crew. Russell, professional and punctual, reportedly grew exasperated, dismissing Monroe as a spoiled child. Monroe, meanwhile, envied Russell's confidence, her rapport with directors, and her ability to command attention without trying. The studio, desperate to protect Monroe's image, often excused her behavior, fueling Russell's resentment. Whispers spread that Russell believed Monroe's fame was manufactured by studio publicity, not raw talent. Monroe, sensitive to criticism, withdrew even further, surrounded by handlers who insulated her from co-stars. Though the film was a hit, their off-screen distance was palpable. At press events, Russell would subtly outshine Monroe, delivering sharp one-liners while Monroe smiled nervously. Gossip columnists feasted on their tension, hinting that the blonde and the brunette barely tolerated each other. In later interviews, Russell softened her stance, praising Monroe's vulnerability and tragic beauty. But the cracks in their working relationship remained a reminder of how Hollywood often pitted women against one another for attention. The result was a quiet but undeniable feud, one that showcased the loneliness behind Monroe's iconic smile and the frustration of a seasoned star forced to play second to a studio-made phenomenon. Number 11. Elizabeth Taylor versus Debbie Reynolds. Few Hollywood feuds cut as deeply into personal betrayal as Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds. Reynolds, America's sweetheart, was married to crooner Eddie Fisher. Taylor, her close friend, was mourning the loss of her husband Mike Todd in 1958. What followed shocked Hollywood. In her grief, Taylor leaned on Fisher for support, and soon their friendship turned into an affair. Within months, Fisher divorced Reynolds and married Taylor. The betrayal rocked Hollywood gossip columns, painting Taylor as a heartless husband-stealer and Reynolds as a humiliated wife. Their feud wasn't just professional, it was painfully personal, splashed across every headline. The scandal tainted Taylor's reputation for years, though she continued to dominate the screen with films like Cleopatra. Reynolds, meanwhile, rebuilt her image as the resilient underdog, beloved by audiences who sympathized with her heartbreak. Hollywood itself became divided. Some sided with Taylor's passion, others with Reynolds's wounded dignity. For years, the two women avoided each other, their names forever linked in tabloid history. But time softened the animosity. Decades later, the pair reconciled publicly, even appearing together on television, laughing about their once infamous feud. Yet, the shadow of betrayal never fully faded. Their story endures because it wasn't just about jealousy. It was about love, loss, and loyalty shattered under the relentless gaze of Hollywood's spotlight. It proved that even in the glamorous golden age, human heartbreak could make icons look painfully mortal. Number 10. Sophia Loren vs. Jane Mansfield. The 1950s were an era obsessed with glamour, and few embodied it more than Sophia Loren and Jane Mansfield. Loren, the Italian goddess, was celebrated for her exotic sophistication, while Mansfield, Hollywood's working-class Monroe, was famous for her outrageous curves and publicity stunts. They should have shared the limelight as contemporaries. Instead, they collided in a single, unforgettable moment. The feud's spark was lit at a Beverly Hills party in 1957. Loren, newly arrived from Europe, was the guest of honor. Mansfield, notorious for crashing events, swept in uninvited, wearing a plunging gown designed to steal every eye in the room. As she leaned over the dinner table, photographers caught Loren's gaze fixed, unimpressed, and disapproving. The photo became one of Hollywood's most legendary images. Behind the scenes, Loren resented Mansfield's deliberate provocations, describing her as a woman who lived for cheap publicity. Mansfield, on the other hand, reportedly mocked Loren's accent and dramatic seriousness, painting her as humorless. Studios amplified the rivalry, inviting columnists to pit the two bombshells against each other as symbols of different Hollywood ideals. European elegance versus American excess. The infamous photograph cemented their feud in pop culture. Loren later admitted she avoided eye contact with Mansfield because she feared her dress would cause a scandal. The moment haunted her career for decades. Journalists constantly dragged it up whenever her name appeared in print. Their rivalry wasn't prolonged, but it became iconic, a snapshot of Hollywood's obsession with competition, spectacle, and the ruthless fight for attention. One image defined their hatred, whether entirely real or partly manufactured. It remains proof of how old Hollywood could turn even a dinner party into a battlefield of egos. Number 9. Ava Gardner vs. Lana Turner. Both Ava Gardner and Lana Turner were dazzling stars of MGM, women whose beauty and talent defined the studio's golden years. Yet behind the glossy studio portraits, a deep rivalry simmered, fueled by jealousy, ambition, and romantic entanglements. The trouble began when Gardner was cast in roles Turner desperately wanted. MGM executives praised Gardner's sultry screen presence, quietly suggesting she might be the studio's next queen. Turner, already an established star, took offense. The tension was worsened by their shared taste in men. Both women were linked sometimes simultaneously to figures like crooner Frank Sinatra and gangster Johnny Stompanato. Their feud exploded in the tabloids in 1958 after Stompanato's shocking death. Stompanato, Turner's abusive lover, was stabbed by her teenage daughter in what was ruled justifiable homicide. Gardner, who had also been romantically involved with him, allegedly offered cutting remarks that stung Turner deeply. Hollywood insiders whispered that Gardner blamed Turner for the scandal, while Turner saw Gardner's comments as betrayal. On set, their rivalry was just as fierce. Crews recalled icy glares exchanged during social gatherings and award shows. Gossip columnists feasted on the spectacle, painting them as glamorous gladiators locked in battle for MGM supremacy. Over time, both women's careers faded, but their feud remained a fixture in Hollywood lore. Even decades later, journalists revived the story whenever their names resurfaced. Their enmity symbolized the cost of stardom, how friendships could curdle into grudges under the brutal glare of studio manipulation. Their story is remembered not just for scandal, but as a cautionary tale of how Hollywood weaponized beauty and desire, turning two women into rivals when they might have been allies. Number 8. Judy Garland versus Bette Hutton. Judy Garland, the darling of MGM musicals, was a force of nature, a woman whose voice could bring audiences to tears. Bette Hutton, brash and energetic, was Paramount's blonde bombshell of comedy. When their careers collided in the late 1940s, the sparks weren't creative. They were combative. The feud began with Annie Get Your Gun in 1949. Garland had been cast as Annie Oakley, but years of overwork and dependence on studio-mandated pills left her exhausted. She was fired mid-production. MGM quickly replaced her with Bette Hutton, who brought her own manic style to the role. The swap devastated Garland, who saw it as a public humiliation. Hutton, meanwhile, wasn't gracious. She openly bragged about saving the film and mocked Garland's instability. Hollywood insiders whispered that Hutton enjoyed twisting the knife, playing up Garland's struggles for her own benefit. Garland, wounded and furious, never forgave her. Though Annie Get Your Gun became a success, it marked a devastating chapter in Garland's career and cemented animosity between the two women. Hutton's performance won praise, but critics noted the role had been tailor-made for Garland's talents. Fans whispered about what might have been, keeping the rivalry alive in the public's imagination. The feud followed both women through the years. Garland spiraled through personal battles, while Hutton faded from stardom. Yet whenever Hutton's name appeared, it was tied to the story of stealing Garland's greatest role. Their hatred symbolizes the cruelty of the studio system, pitting actresses against each other, exploiting weaknesses, and replacing icons without hesitation. In the end, the feud became less about Garland and Hutton and more about how Hollywood chewed up talent, leaving bitterness in its wake. Number 7. Joan Fontaine versus Bette Davis. Bette Davis had a reputation for sharp wit and sharper elbows. Joan Fontaine, with her cool elegance and precision, was the kind of actress who could cut her rivals to pieces with a single glance. When the two shared the screen in The Virgin Queen in 1955, Hollywood insiders already knew the set would be charged with more than royal pageantry. Davis, fiercely protective of her territory, reportedly dismissed Fontaine as icy and difficult. Fontaine, equally unamused by Davis's domineering manner, found her co-star insufferably arrogant. Tension ran high during filming. Some whispered that Davis, long accustomed to being the centerpiece of any production, resented Fontaine's insistence on equal screen presence. Fontaine, meanwhile, resented Davis's habit of giving acting notes to her fellow performers, a move many saw as meddling. Their dislike became so pronounced that studio heads were forced to stagger promotional appearances to keep the feud from boiling over in public. Though the film was marketed as a historical epic, gossip columns gleefully painted it as a duel between two divas. Fans ate it up, turning the movie into a battle of personalities as much as a story about royalty. The aftermath left scars. Fontaine largely avoided Davis for the rest of her career, dismissing her in interviews as a woman who needed enemies to feel alive. Davis, never one to hold her tongue, occasionally shot back, reinforcing their place in Hollywood lore as rivals who never reconciled. Their feud reflected a truth about old Hollywood. Sometimes, the drama off-screen eclipsed the spectacle on it, leaving behind legacies stained with bitterness. Number 6. Barbara Stanwyck versus Katharine Hepburn. Barbara Stanwyck was tough as nails, a no-nonsense actress who built her career on grit and credibility. Katharine Hepburn, by contrast, was patrician elegance and biting intellect. Both were respected. Both were trailblazers. But together, they clashed like oil and water. The feud began during the 1930s, when Stanwyck reportedly mocked Hepburn's East Coast accent and aloof manner. "She's not one of us." Stanwyck was overheard saying a jab at Hepburn's privileged background and disdain for Hollywood norms. Hepburn, in turn, dismissed Stanwyck as common and lacking sophistication. Their rivalry deepened as they vied for prestige roles. Hepburn won 4 Academy Awards across her career, while Stanwyck, despite powerhouse performances in films like Double Indemnity, never won a competitive Oscar. The disparity became a sore point, with some insiders suggesting Stanwyck believed Hepburn's accolades were more about politics than talent. Although they never engaged in explosive public fights, their disdain seeped into interviews and industry chatter. Hepburn once said she admired Stanwyck's toughness, but would never want to be her. Stanwyck, fiercely loyal to her working-class identity, viewed Hepburn as the embodiment of Hollywood snobbery. Their feud symbolized class divisions within the industry: East Coast refinement versus hard-knock survival. In later years, film historians often compared the two as parallel legends, different styles, different legacies, bound by rivalry. Their enmity endures as a reminder that Hollywood was never a sisterhood of stars. It was a battlefield where respect was scarce, and admiration often soured into resentment. Number 5. Mae West versus Marlene Dietrich. Mae West was Hollywood's queen of innuendo, a master of wit who turned suggestive dialogue into art. Marlene Dietrich, the German-born siren, exuded icy glamour and androgynous allure. Both women pushed boundaries in an era obsessed with censorship. But instead of allies, they became enemies, each determined to outshine the other. The feud began when Paramount sought to pair them in a film during the mid-1930s. The idea was to unite two icons for maximum box office power. Instead, negotiations collapsed under the weight of ego. West reportedly demanded script control to ensure she had more lines than Dietrich. Dietrich, insulted, refused to play second fiddle. From then on, they traded barbs through the press. West mocked Dietrich's foreign mystique, suggesting it was an act. Dietrich countered by dismissing West as vulgar and outdated. Hollywood gossip columnists amplified every jab, delighting in the notion of two trailblazers tearing each other down. Their rivalry wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. West represented brash American humor, while Dietrich embodied European sophistication. Both women challenged traditional femininity, but in opposite ways. The industry pitted them against each other, feeding an imagined war that overshadowed their groundbreaking artistry. In the end, no collaboration ever materialized. Instead, their feud lingered in memory, shaping how audiences remembered them, not just as icons, but as rivals who couldn't share the stage. Their story is proof of Hollywood's cruel paradox. Women bold enough to defy convention were often turned into adversaries, ensuring their brilliance never combined, only collided. Number 4. Joan Crawford versus Mercedes McCambridge. Joan Crawford's name appears often in the chronicles of Hollywood feuds, but her battle with Mercedes McCambridge during the filming of Johnny Guitar in 1954 was among the most ferocious. Crawford, the established star, arrived on set expecting deference. McCambridge, a strong-willed actress with a reputation for fiery performances, refused to bow. What followed became a powder keg. Crawford resented McCambridge's intensity, while McCambridge reportedly called Crawford the most hateful woman I've ever met. Their feud turned violent. Stories circulated that Crawford would spike McCambridge's costumes with alcohol, knowing she was a recovering alcoholic. McCambridge, in turn, allegedly sabotaged Crawford's props. On screen, their characters fought bitterly, but off-screen, the venom was real. Crew members described the set as radioactive, with daily clashes and screaming matches that threatened to derail the film. Though Johnny Guitar flopped in America, it became a cult classic in Europe, celebrated for its raw emotional energy. Many critics later argued that the sheer animosity between Crawford and McCambridge translated into performances brimming with authentic hatred. Their feud never healed. McCambridge carried her bitterness to the grave, calling Crawford poison. Crawford, as always, never admitted weakness, but her reputation as Hollywood's most combative diva was forever cemented. Their enmity proved that sometimes a feud could burn so hot it fueled unforgettable cinema. Number try. Marilyn Monroe vs. Elizabeth Taylor. Two of Hollywood's most legendary women, Marilyn Monroe, the tragic goddess, and Elizabeth Taylor, the tempestuous queen, were often compared, but rarely side by side. Studios and tabloids turned them into competitors for headlines, men, and public adoration. The rivalry began in the late 1950s, when Monroe's box office power began to slip just as Taylor's soared. Taylor's performance in Cleopatra and her high-profile romances dominated the press. Monroe, sensitive to being overshadowed, reportedly raged at studio executives who favored Taylor for prestige projects. Behind the scenes, Taylor allegedly mocked Monroe's vulnerability, calling her pathetic and childlike. Monroe, in return, dismissed Taylor as calculating, accusing her of using scandal as publicity. Their feud wasn't just whispered, it was splashed across tabloids, with columnists breathlessly asking, "Who is Hollywood's true queen?" What makes this rivalry particularly poignant is Monroe's early death in 1962. Some journalists cruelly suggested Taylor had won by default. But in reality, both women were victims of a system that exploited them, turning their lives into a public spectacle. Taylor went on to dominate the 60s, but Monroe's legend only grew in death. Today, their feud is remembered less for pettiness and more as a tragic story of two women forced to compete in a world that never allowed them to simply coexist. Number 2. Bette Davis vs. Miriam Hopkins. Few rivalries dripped with as much venom as Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins. The two actresses co-starred in The Old, made in 1939, a film about two women locked in a bitter rivalry. Life imitated art with shocking precision. Hopkins, temperamental and jealous, despised Davis's rising star. She accused Davis of stealing her roles, her directors, even her lovers. Davis, never shy of a cutting remark, dismissed Hopkins as insufferable. On set, their clashes were legendary. Hopkins would deliberately flub lines to force retakes, dragging scenes out to irritate Davis. Davis retaliated by upstaging Hopkins at every turn, ensuring she remained the focal point in every frame. Audiences loved their chemistry, mistaking authentic hatred for great acting. But for the cast and crew, it was hell. The feud followed them into later projects, including Old Acquaintance in 1943. In one infamous scene, Davis's character shakes Hopkins violently. Rumor has it Davis relished the moment, delivering a little extra force as years of resentment boiled over. Their feud never healed. Hopkins faded into obscurity, while Davis cemented her legacy as one of Hollywood's greatest actresses. Yet, their enmity remains a case study in how rivalry can sharpen performances, even as it corrodes lives behind the curtain. Number 1. Joan Crawford vs. Norma Shearer. At the very top of old Hollywood feuds stands Joan Crawford and Norma Shearer, a clash that defined MGM's golden years. Shearer, the First Lady of MGM, was married to studio head Irving Thalberg, giving her unparalleled influence. Crawford, hungry for respect, viewed Shearer as a rival who had been handed opportunities she had clawed for. Their rivalry exploded over The Women in 1939, a film that assembled Hollywood's greatest actresses into one ensemble. Crawford played the scheming shop girl, while Shearer portrayed the elegant society wife. The tension was palpable. Crawford relished her role as the villain, declaring she would steal every scene from Norma. Shearer fought back, with icy poise, refusing to let Crawford's ambition rattle her. Off-screen, their disdain was public. Crawford mocked Shearer's privileged marriage, sneering that she slept her way to the top. Shearer dismissed Crawford as vulgar and unworthy of MGM's crown. Studio publicists fanned the flames, promoting the film as a duel between its stars. Audiences adored it, turning the feud into box office gold. The aftermath was cruelly ironic. After Thalberg's death, Shearer's influence waned. Crawford eventually ascended, proving her longevity. But the bitterness between them never dissolved. Their feud remains Hollywood's ultimate story of ambition and resentment, a battle not just for roles, but for the throne of stardom itself. Behind the shimmering gowns and dazzling lights, old Hollywood thrived on rivalries that cut deeper than any script. These women weren't just actresses, they were warriors in a world that forced them to compete. Which feud shocked you the most? Comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden truths of Hollywood's golden age.